You're listening to Beyond the Endpoint, a podcast from the Duke Clinical Research Institute. In this series, we're demystifying clinical research and answering your pressing questions about health and healthcare. You can find our full episodes at dcri.org/BTE.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Endpoint. My name is Emily O'Brien, and I'm here today with my co-host, Dr. Manesh Patel, and recurring guest host, Jenny Cook.
You might remember Jenny from our episode on grief in the clinical setting with Dr. Tony Galanos. That was really a powerful episode, and it's great to have Jenny back. Jenny's an associate director at the Trent Center for Bioethics, Humanities, and History of Medicine at the Duke School of Medicine. Previously, she worked in research communications and engagement here at the DCRI. Welcome back, Jenny.
Thanks, Manesh. It's great to be back.
It's been a minute since we actually originally recorded this interview, and things have changed, haven't they?
They have. I think we recorded this interview with Katie back in the summer, and since then we have seen support for clinical research drop a little bit, interest and funding and support. So the timing of this conversation actually couldn't be better.
Part of why we do these podcasts and part of why I think it's really great to have this series is to bring the science closer to the people we take care of and the impact of it. And, you know, I've sort of been saying, well, one of the things we've not done as well in some of the academic institutions or even in universities or scientific places is describe how those findings translate into health or opportunities for health. So it's not always just clinical trials. Of course, it's also things we do every day for each other and our patients. But I do think for clinical trials, it's an option and an important part of our message.
It's also really important to understand that some of these stories, and Katie's story is a happy one, they're brought to you by science. And that's something we need to hit home a little bit more often. Since we recorded this with Katie as well, she was actually featured in the Washington Post. And there was a pretty deep dive on her family history. And as Katie will tell you, she has a family history with cancer. Her outcome was different because of the science that took place over the course of her life. Science is one step at a time, basic research, moving on to bedside research, moving on to really important therapies that change people's lives. So I'm excited about this discussion.
Yeah, I think your point's really great. These kinds of work that we do in investigation, discovery, taking it from the idea to an actual study to getting people engaged and finding out if it actually helps human health to actually bringing therapies or new behaviors to practice is really valuable. So I am excited. And I think her story really brings this home for us.
Yeah, let's get into it. I had the chance to speak with Katie Ortman-Doble, a good friend of mine and a patient advocate, about her own experience participating in a life-saving clinical trial. Here she is.
Hi, my name is Katie Ortman-Doble, and I am a stage 4 cancer survivor.
Katie, thanks so much for talking to us. We met, I feel like we had a little bit of a meet cute professionally. We met at a conference in San Diego, and you gave a really powerful presentation and testimonial about your story, but you had this slide where you used a really big curse word on text and you said it. And I can't say what the word is, but I just thought, wow, I really want to be friends with Katie. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. It was my 1 year cancer-free or NEDiversary. NED stands for no evidence of disease, which is technically what I'm supposed to call it. But yeah, I had just hit my 1 year mark that week and we got to celebrate.
It was one of my favorite moments meeting a stranger at a conference. We had a fantastic time.
Yes.
This story is a really great entryway into this larger discussion we want to have in this podcast about clinical research. So I thought maybe I'd ask you, why did you use that really big curse word in your presentation?
Yes, that's a great question. It's really hard to put words around what it is like to be 32 years old and told that you have 16 months to live. The week that I was diagnosed with cancer, I also got engaged. And it was a really emotional time. And I was really angry with cancer because I had other plans and it was hijacking my life. And so the only word I could come up with to describe how I felt was that word. And it's sometimes the only thing we can say to get through those hard moments. So it was really scary getting that diagnosis. I was diagnosed with stage 4 ocular melanoma, a rare form of melanoma that impacts 6 in a million people. And I had first been diagnosed at 31 years old. I had a tumor in my eyeball. And when they biopsied my tumor, during the treatment of that first bout with cancer, I was told there was a less than 2% chance that it would spread. And then a year and a half later is when I got my stage 4 diagnosis, and we learned that it had spread.
So I'm sure at that point you were eager to know what your treatment options were.
Yes. So when I was diagnosed, I was given one treatment option from the oncologist who diagnosed me. And that treatment option was FDA approved for cutaneous melanoma or skin melanoma. So at the time of my diagnosis, there was literally no treatment option for my kind of cancer. And my dad is an internist, and he knew to ask the question, what about clinical trials? My mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 1995 when I was 13 years old. And unfortunately, she passed away 2 years later. And the week that she passed away, she was supposed to fly to California for a clinical trial. And I think that's the reason, and because he's a doctor, that my dad knew we should be exploring other options here. We asked that doctor, what about clinical trials? And she responded, that would be very expensive. I didn't realize at the time how detrimental that comment could have been. I think 9 out of 10 patients would have said, okay, and they would have moved forward with that one treatment option, and they wouldn't still be here today. My dad didn't like the 16-month prognosis that I was given. And so we left that meeting, and while I busied myself getting my ring resized and starting to plan my wedding with my fiance, who proposed 2 days after the diagnosis, my dad was on the phone with doctors all over the country trying to figure out what clinical trials might buy me more time, more than that 16 months. So that's how we first got introduced. He ended up getting us a meeting at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. And we flew out there, my dad and my fiance and I flew to New York, and we met with the doctor there and learned about a clinical trial that was hopefully going to give me a better shot. We decided this course of treatment would be better than starting with the other option that didn't have really good numbers to show at all. And that's how I ended up in my first clinical trial. I was stable for 8 months in that trial. And I talk about with stage 4 cancer, all you want to do is buy more time. And that bought us a good chunk of time. And while we were meeting with that doctor and in that treatment, he was teaching us the importance of strategy with clinical trials. And had I started that first treatment that the first doctor recommended, I would not have been eligible for that clinical trial in New York. So it's really important for patients and families to understand the importance of gathering and knowing all of your options before making any sudden movements. And I'm grateful for Dr. Pesto at Sloan Kettering for teaching us that. And so while I was in that first trial, he was then talking about my case with doctors all over the country. With very rare diseases, you want all of the key players to know who you are. So my dad had established contacts with his initial outreach, and we continued those conversations throughout the course of my first clinical trial to always have a plan B and a plan C. So when that trial no longer worked, we knew what we were doing next. And that, I think, has been one of the most beneficial things that we've done to keep me going in this fight.
And that's exactly what happened, right? You ended up participating in a few other clinical trials.
So I did 2 more trials in Denver, Colorado, closer to home, which was great. One of the issues with clinical trials and rare cancers is access. And I had the means to fly to get my treatment. I recognize that I'm very lucky to have that. I'm very lucky to have had my dad. I did 2 more clinical trials at UC Health in Denver, and I had a liver embolization procedure, which actually stabilized me for the longest amount of time, stabilized my liver for 3.5 years. And in that time, TIL therapy became something that we were talking about more and more. TIL therapy stands for tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. And it is a therapy where they extract a solid tumor from my liver, and then they have to see if I can grow the TIL, if I can grow this tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, which I was able to do. And so from there, I had a leukapheresis procedure where they extracted white blood cells from my body and then fed that to my TIL, multiplying it from the millions to the billions. And then in September of 2021, my husband and I flew out to Pittsburgh, where UPMC, where this treatment was being done. And I checked into the hospital for about 3 weeks. They gave me 7 days of chemotherapy, which essentially completely wiped out my immune system. And then I got reinfused with my own cells. And that was a 22-minute, really uneventful infusion. And then I had IL-2, which is an immunotherapy that sort of re-kickstarts your immune system. It was a tough treatment, very similar to the treatment that my mom was supposed to get in 1997. And we saw really great results. Over the course of the following year, we watched tumors shrink. And then one tumor kept growing and it was hollowing out from the inside and really misbehaving. And so in September of 2021, we went back to Pittsburgh. I had half of my liver surgically removed. And when I woke up from that surgery, I was told that I was no evidence of disease. And I am approaching the 3-year anniversary of that surgery and 4 years since I had the TIL therapy in September.
Congratulations. What a journey, Katie. That's just amazing news.
Thank you. Thank you.
How did your participation in these clinical trials change the way you think about them or understand your role in research?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm a fan. And I think what people don't understand is that the everyday drugs that you take and that you take for granted were once in a clinical trial. So anything that you take over the counter, Prilosec, Advil, anything that you think has been around forever was at some point an idea, and scientists were studying it and testing it and trialing it and trying to make it a viable drug that we now use every single day. And I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen is there are just a lot of misconceptions on what clinical research is, what it means, how it comes to fruition. But for me, I knew, my dad knew, and I always just say I was along for the ride, that if I wanted the best shot at getting the most cutting edge treatment, clinical trials were what I needed to do. And so I view clinical trials and research as scientists looking to save more lives, and to be a part of that and to have my numbers and my stats be a part of that, I think is a privilege. And I'm proud to be a part of clinical research. And I wish that more people would consider it, especially people with rare diseases.
And now you've become the go-to person to talk to people about this, patient to patient.
I gave my first talk in 2017 for the Melanoma Research Foundation. I was a recipient of the Courage Award given out at their Wings of Hope Gala in Denver in 2017. My whole family was there to support me. My parents and brothers flew in. And I, prior to that, was terrified of public speaking. And when I got up there and was able to share my story, it just kind of moved something in me. And I know that as patients, I use the word bandwidth a lot. There's a lot happening. There's a lot to manage. For me, I was playing travel agent and I was dealing with insurance and I was working full time, and there was a lot on my plate. And the first thing that I wanted to do when I had the bandwidth, when I got my first break in treatment, was to focus on my diet and try to do what I could to help my body. And over the course of the last decade, I have just really found that being able to share my story, I think that it's a powerful story. There was a less than 1% chance that I would still be standing here today. And I want to take the hard lessons that I've learned and try to make it a little bit easier for the next person. There's no handbook, there's no guidebook on how to fight for your life. And there's the research to consider. So many patients ask me about diet and things like that. There's just a lot to balance and to consider. And so for me, to be able to take what I've learned and share it is really important. And it's something I've really enjoyed doing.
If you could give someone who's interested in participating in a clinical trial one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think the piece of advice that I always give and that I want people to know is, like I said earlier, the importance of just, you have to be a squeaky wheel, and you want every single doctor in your field to know who you are. When I met Dr. Kamula at UPMC, he walked into the room and he said to me, "Katie, I've been following your case for years. It's so nice to finally meet you." And I was so flattered. And then I remembered, oh my God, this guy's an oncologist. It's not that cool that he knows who I am. But I think the strategy piece that I learned at Sloan Kettering is so incredibly important. You want to connect with as many institutions that you possibly can, with as many researchers and doctors as you possibly can, build a solid team. Most of the doctors that I've encountered in my fight have been highly collaborative and willing to make introductions. There are some stinkers out there who aren't, so you need to really trust your gut And don't be afraid of the doctor's ego. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions. Don't be afraid to push back. Don't be afraid to get a second opinion. Get a second opinion. But gather all of your opinions and research and build a strategy from there. And hopefully you'll have a team of doctors who will help you understand, okay, if we do A, we can't do B. Why don't we start with B and we can fall back on A if B doesn't work? So you have to take your options and strategically put them together so that you continue to have as many options as possible.
That sounds really complicated. If you're someone who's relatively unfamiliar with clinical trials as a concept, I bet it can be scary to come into that context and be the squeaky wheel.
Yes. I think that there's nothing to be afraid of. I think understanding clinical research and what it is what's so important. There are different phases. So depending on your condition and what the trial is, you need to understand what phase it's in. For me, I couldn't be in a phase where I was getting standard of care. So understanding what you're getting and how you're helping advance medicine. So you might be in a clinical trial where you're getting standard of care, and that's going to be enough for what you need, but you are in your participation helping advance research, helping improve whatever is currently available and making it even better. And so I think it's just important to not be afraid of it and to know that you're a part of something, you're a part of making improvements in people's lives.
What do you wish that researchers better understood from the perspective of participants in clinical trials?
For researchers, it's important, I think, to really understand the different types of patients who are out there. I am one single patient. My situation and scenario is unique to me, and all of us have different barriers, whether that's transportation to and from a hospital to pick up medication, working full time, needing to consider childcare. There's a lot people have on their plates, and making it as easy and accessible as possible for participants is what's going to improve outreach and increase participation.
What are some of the common misconceptions about participation?
There's so many, I don't even know where to begin. One, that it's expensive. For me, the cost came with the travel. There wasn't a cost to participate in the clinical trial, but there was a cost to get myself to New York to pick up the medication every month. I did have great insurance at the time. And so I know that my insurance was billed for certain things and it was covered, but there was no cost out of pocket for me apart from what you would expect from meeting with doctors and getting treatment of any kind. The expense came at getting to New York and having to go there for my scans and to pick up my medication every month. I learned about resources along the way. So Hope Lodge is a resource that provides free lodging in 30 major markets to people traveling for cancer treatments. This is something that I think, again, that goes back to the bandwidth, where in the beginning, I didn't have time. It wasn't even on my radar to look into something like that. And I came across that about 5 months into my treatment in New York City. So when I would fly to New York, I would stay for free at the Hope Lodge in the middle of Manhattan. And that helped tremendously with some of the cost. And then friends set up a GoFundMe, and I had very generous and kind friends and family who contributed to that. And that helped quite a bit as well. Corporate Angel Network or something like that is an organization that partners with private plane owners who will lend out their planes to get people a ride from Iowa to New York if they need to go there for a treatment. There's a lot out there, but that does take, again, digging and effort. And that's where partnering with a social worker at the hospital where you're getting your treatment is beneficial, because social workers tend to have a lot of that information. I think one of the misconceptions is that it's just for cancer. Clinical research is for everything. It is not just oncology. They have clinical research on like diet and nutrition and sleep apnea and diabetes and everything under the sun. And I think that a lot of people only equate it with oncology and cancer.
I'm pretty sure you have started writing a book, providing people with some of your takeaways from participating in a clinical trial.
Yes, so I have already written it, and it is essentially the self-help inspirational guide I'm trying to take my story and give the lessons that I've learned on how to be the squeaky wheel and advocate for yourself, how to organize resources, how to delegate when you're feeling like you're drowning and you've got a million people saying, let me know what you need. Learning how to actually say, okay, sister, I need you to do the research on what to expect for this surgery, because I don't like Googling those things, because I always end up getting the scariest worst case scenarios and then I can't get that out of my head. I wrote this book. I've been working on it for probably since 2016, and it is complete, and I'm working on trying to get it out into the world right now. And then I'm continuing to do my speaking and sharing my story and trying to help just show what it is like to be a patient going through what I've been through.
Katie, thank you so much for everything you're doing to advocate for patients and for clinical research, and for joining us today and sharing some of these hard-earned lessons learned. I think there are people out there listening that are really going to appreciate and be inspired by your story and want to learn more.
Thanks for having me.
But I know what people really want to know is what the word was. The word was fudge.
Yeah, this is so fun, Jenny. Thank you so much for thinking of me. Good to see you again.
Thanks again to Katie for sharing her firsthand perspective on clinical research participation. I'm back with my friend and Beyond the Endpoint host, Emily O'Brien, now to talk takeaways. Emily, I think the idea of high stakes research and low stakes research are connected and really interesting, because that everyday low stakes research, it ladders up to big life-saving moments like what we just heard from Katie. I'm curious, you're a professor and you're a researcher. What is your big why when you're telling people why they should participate in this lower stakes research where people might not immediately benefit themselves, but it could save someone else's life? Why is that so important?
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's a different set of considerations, right? And one thing I think is really important for people to recognize is that just by going to the doctor's office, going into the hospital, unfortunately, we don't know what works a lot of the time. And clinical decision making is imperfect, right? We want that to improve, and the way that we can reduce the uncertainty around what we do and, make it possible for physicians and other care providers to be more confident in their care and for it to be more evidence-based is by getting people excited about being part of research and being part of that evidence generation process. And in a perfect world, every single medical decision would be based on really good data. And unfortunately, that's just not the world we live in right now. But we can reduce that uncertainty if we all decide that we're going to be part of the process and we're going to contribute to this process of generating evidence.
Why do people mistrust research, and how should we answer that mistrust?
I think this is a critical point, for us to acknowledge as people who work in research, and also for people who are considering participating, that if you don't trust clinicians and scientists because of historical harms and injustices, that's totally valid. It's an ugly history in many ways. Many people are aware of the Tuskegee syphilis study and other examples of historical abuses where doctors and scientists have not always done what's right and what's ethical for people. And in addition to that, often people will look around at groups of other people who are involved in research and they say, those people don't really look like me. People who look like me or who are from areas like where I live, why aren't they part of these study populations and why aren't they better represented? And sometimes I think what happens is they think this isn't really relevant to me. This isn't really something that can benefit people like me. So why should I participate? And, I'll be honest, Jenny, I struggle with this because I don't think these problems have gone away. I do think we've gotten better with time. There are, additional safeguards in place to make sure that participation is as safe as possible, as equitable as possible for everybody who decides to be part of research, no matter, who they are. And we are getting better with time. I do believe that. But the truth is, if we want to learn about how treatments work in different populations, we need people to sign up and to be part of the work from diverse settings, from diverse groups. And that's the best way for us to figure out whether treatments are just as beneficial in men versus women, for example, or older versus younger. We can't do that. We can't get there unless we have participation. So I would say, let's all acknowledge that there's a difficult history here that has harmed people and that is painful. And yet we can move forward together if we are transparent and if we're honest about the safeguards that are in place and about what our intentions are, about what the risks are. And that can get us to a place of having more evidence that could help everybody as opposed to just a select group of people.
I'm also curious. I don't just recruit folks for research. I'm also a super participator myself. And there's certain things I look for when I'm invited to participate in research. As a researcher, what would you advise people, your friends and your relatives, in what they should look for when they're invited to participate in research to make them feel better and what they should expect to get out of it?
I've also been part of a number of research studies. I was almost a professional research participant during grad school. That was like my little side hustle. And so I think for me, when I was taking part in research, like I often felt like I was a fish out of water and that I didn't know what questions to ask. And there was this process that was just churning and I was expected to just jump in. That's not true, right? As a participant, what I should have done was raise my hand and said, hey, first of all, how's this going to benefit me? You went through that section too fast. Can you slow down and tell me a little bit more about the risks here? Or you covered the risks, but I don't understand how likely those are, how they can be minimized. The point is, people should really feel confident in asking questions. They should be totally comfortable with saying, let's talk about this in more detail. They should absolutely ask how they're going to get results back. We know that this is a big reason that people like to participate. They want to find out what the study found and how it could potentially benefit them and how they can share those results with other people who it might benefit. So ask that question. Say, when are you guys planning on wrapping up? When are you going to have the results from the study? How am I going to get them? Are you going to call me? Am I going to get them over email? People who participate in research are partners, right? It's not just that they're there to receive whatever intervention they're getting. They're a very integral and critical part of the process, and the research can't happen without them. So they have every right and should be totally confident in asking a lot of questions early on and feeling totally comfortable with, hey, here's what's coming. And here's how I can continue to have my voice heard, throughout this process.
I know that you study implementation as well, which is not just what happens in research, but how do we make research actually benefit all of us and make us all healthier? And a crucial component, I think, is that the participants should be smarter for participating as well. The idea that you should get results back is so critical because you can then talk to your friends and your family and even your doctor or your clinician and tell them about your participation. And in many ways, it's those many points of dissemination that matter. And it's really important that the research matters, that you as a participant know what happened so that you can speak to it too.
Gift cards are nice, but having a bit of knowledge that can help improve your life or the lives of your friends and family is, for most people, I think just as valuable, if not more valuable. So Jenny, as somebody who is involved with recruiting people, for research as part of your job and also someone who's participated, how do you think we can make it easier for people to participate? What should people be thinking about if they're sort of on the fence or thinking they might want to be part of a research study in the future?
That is such a great question. And it's something that I know that Katie has been thinking deeply about. And it's something that we had conversations. In her story, there's a lot of privilege involved in having the money to travel, in having time off of work for that high stakes participation. And so there's a lot of questions about how we make those high stakes, life-saving clinical trials available to a wider array of people, not just folks who have advantages, but everyone. I think there's a lot of organizations and a lot of funders have to think deeply about how we want to do that. For low stakes participation that might be in your own community, there's a lot of things that I think we as researchers should be doing in just little small things like making it easier to park, making sure that you're not forcing folks to go into a clinic if a phone call or a survey online would do, moving the activities of research into places that are more convenient for the people who are participating, and also thinking carefully about how much information you need and if that information is truly needed, reducing the burden. I know as a curious person, I always want to add on. I want lots of double-barreled questions. If I already have you here, let me ask you this and this and this. That adds up. One question and another lab test and another thing. Think carefully, think about the participant, keeping the participant at the center of your research. So you're minimizing their time, you're minimizing the burden to get there, You're thinking about the hours of when you're doing this. So you understand that people have to work their jobs, that participation isn't a job. Lots of little things. And I think there's a role for everyone, from funders to communicators and people who are engaging like me, to think about large and small factors.
One of the things that strikes me as feeling small but is actually quite large is gratitude. Just letting people know how critical they are to this whole process. Again, we can't do it without them. And just reflecting on the time that it takes and the potential risk that people are taking on to help be part of this process. And that's something that we should all be grateful for and that we really can't thank people enough for. So if you have been part of a research study in the past, thank you. And if you are considering, thank you as well. It's something that I think can really benefit all of society and certainly has long-standing potential ripple effects that sometimes don't even immediately see. So we're grateful for you.
I agree. It's so important to keep participants aware of this larger mission that they're part of, which is, I think, what we're talking about today. It's a big deal to participate, and it's really important. So before we go, Emily, I want to encourage people to go to our episode guide, because if you want to dig in and learn more, there are resources out there to help you better understand what clinical trials are. There are also resources to match you to clinical trials. And so we'll be listing all of those in the episode guide. So there's a lot more to learn. I know we've only scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to Katie Ortman-Doble and Jenny Cook for joining us for today's episode of Beyond the Endpoint. Join us next time when Manesh speaks with Krista Kamulia, a clinical research coordinator at the Heart Center Clinical Research Unit here at Duke. They'll provide us with a perspective from the other side of the bench, the people doing the research.
This has been Beyond the Endpoint. Resources related to this episode are available on dcri.org/BTE. If you have any burning questions about clinical research or healthcare, drop us a line at beyondtheendpoint@duke.edu. We'd love to address your questions in a future episode.